Hello, I'm Brad Smith, and welcome to Unit 9, where we look at optimising the supply chain using inventory. Over the next 2 weeks, we'll look at how inventory can be used to optimise an organisation's performance. And this comes about through the ability to not only reduce the levels of inventory within the organisation, but at the same time maximise the ability to supply product or services to the customer. This week we look at techniques that are available internally within the organisation to optimise their inventory levels while still maximising their ability to supply the product or service to the customer. And next week we'll look at some techniques that are available across the supply chain between the different parties. This week the tools we'll look at include the use of quantity discounts to try and align the economic order quantity that organisations operate at. Again, you can imagine that when you have a manufacturer of products and an organisation that's buying those products from the manufacturer, the two might have quite different economic order quantities. It might make sense for the manufacturer to produce in much larger quantities, but from the perspective of the purchaser of those products, they might only want to buy smaller quantities, and that is their optimum point of managing their inventory. So how can the manufacturer induce the purchaser of the products to take larger quantities? Well, one common way is through offering quantity discounts. So by purchasing larger quantities, the retailer or the purchaser of the product will take larger quantities, and that enables some alignment. The next thing we'll look at is inventory pooling. This is where organisations can aggregate their inventory at various points throughout the supply chain and then use that point as a source to supply. So rather than a retail outlet, for example, holding inventory at each of its stores around the country, they may choose to have a central warehouse where they combine the inventory, and from that central warehouse they then supply each of the stores on an as-required basis. The advantage of that is often that there is what's called a risk pooling effect, so that overall throughout the supply chain the organisation will have much lower levels of inventory, but it's still able to supply the customer when required. Again, this efficiency versus responsiveness trade-off comes into play. It's much more responsive to hold the inventory at the retail outlet, because then the customer comes in and the inventory is sitting there ready for them to purchase it. If you hold the inventory in a central warehouse, then you have to allow for that time lag required to get the inventory from the central warehouse out to the retail outlets as required. However, the trade-offs or the savings can be quite significant. So it is really something that organisations should look at. A variation on this inventory pooling is the concept of postponement. Particularly in organisations that are trying to run efficient supply chains, they will often hold their inventory in a semi-finished form and only complete the final stages of manufacture or tailoring of the product to meet the customer's requirements after it's been ordered. By holding the inventory in a semi-finished form, in a form that can be finalised to meet whatever demand the customer places on them, again they find they can hold a lot less inventory. So there are considerable savings. A good example of postponement is the way that paint is sold through hardware outlets. Imagine the many thousands of different coloured paints that are available. when you go into a hardware store and you look at the colour cards. Now, if the hardware chain was to try and hold inventory of all of those thousands and thousands of different colours, they would have to have a tremendous amount of inventory to meet the required demand. They wouldn't be able to predict necessarily what colours different customers were going to purchase, so they'd have to have large amounts of inventory. The way they get around that is what they hold in stock is the various base colours. So basic whites and blacks and creams, and then they have the system to tint those base colours to meet the individual customer demand. So this is a classic case of postponement. They hold the inventory of base colours in the semi-finished format, and then they finish off the product as soon as you order it. And that enables them to hold actually quite small levels of inventory in the semi-finished form, but ultimately supply a huge range of colours to customers as they demand it. So it's a very interesting area of supply chain management, and it's an area where companies can derive a huge amount of efficiency. I'll also point out at this stage that there's always a couple of questions in assignment 2 on inventory management and calculations surrounding those. So make sure as you work through Unit 9 and Unit 10 that you do focus on doing the various examples that are scattered throughout the unit, and you understand how to do those examples. If you can work your way through the examples that are given within each unit, you should have no problems when it comes to doing the assignment questions, which are generally very similar. And as usual, if you have any questions or issues, feel free to send me an email and I'll answer those as quickly as possible. Well, I look forward to seeing you in the classroom to discuss Unit 9, and then again meet up with you in Unit 10.